Testing. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm Pastor Parnell.Mahoney from Minneapolis Christian Church, and so glad you guys came tonight. We are a campus ministry here at the U, and you have come to Epic Fail. Was Darwin wrong? First presentation. So we have 3 presentations, and the next one will be tomorrow night, and the third one on Friday night. 3 different separate topics in this room at 7 o'clock. And tonight, the subtitle is Biological Proofs of Evolution Fail. The Evidence Cries Out Designed. For review, if you haven't seen it, tomorrow night, the topic will be What do fossils say about evolution? Nothing, rocks don't talk. And that's a little bit of Dave's humor, I think, in the tricky answer there. I think it's the second one down.
Right there.
And then part 3 on Friday, same time, same place, right here. Geology, who's the hero of the plot? Time, water, or catastrophe? So Dave and Mary Jo, our speakers, will also be sharing at our campus church on Saturday night is when we meet at 7 o'clock. And the location details, if you're interested, are on our little information table over here. And speaking of that, there's a lot of interesting handouts over here and more information about our activities and our ministries. Like we have 2 student groups here, International Student Outreach and Maranatha Christian Fellowship, that are hosting the event, and also some of our speakers in literature and information, and a sign up for their newsletter on that table as well. So why are we doing this presentation tonight? Just to start by telling my own story. So I was not raised a Christian. You might have guessed I'm a Christian pastor. And so I came here to the U and was wondering, if there's more to life than evolution. Am I just an accident? If that's the case, why do I have a conscience? Why do I not do everything that my appetites want to do? Why do I feel like there's some type of moral reason not to, if I'm just a product of time, chance, and accident? So I began to have these questions. I met a man on campus, and he invited me to do a Bible study, and I had never done that before, and somehow he got into my apartment. And on Friday nights, we used to meet and study the Bible together. He'd bring me a big Starbucks coffee, and I was done with partying. It wasn't as interesting to me anymore. There was something else going on in my heart, and so I thought, you know what, I'm going to meet with this guy on Friday nights of all times. So anyhow, I got hope from learning the gospel, and I wondered if it was real. And then Jesus came one night to my apartment, and in the Spirit, and he revealed himself to me. And so that's when he showed me that he's real. That just like the Bible says, he showed me that I'm a sinner. He showed me that I desperately needed him, and that's when I surrendered my life to him that night by myself in my apartment. And so as a result of that, I said, well, the Bible must be true. You know what I mean? I thought it was true because I thought the stories were compelling. There's nobody quite like Jesus. But after he came inside of me and changed my life, then I knew it was true. And that's when I said, okay, I'm gonna believe everything it says. And so what does it say? Well, as a pastor, I'll be honest, not trying to escape the issue. It says that God supernaturally created the world in 6 literal days. Everything, the whole universe. And so in 2 Peter chapter 3, and one of the Peter was a disciple of Jesus. He wrote a couple letters to some Christians in the early 1st century. And he said that in the last days, a sign of the last days would be that people would deny that Jesus is going to return. And part of their denial is a straight-up denial of the Creator. And so a denial of a Creator is kind of more of a modern thing in human culture. It's very common in past culture to believe in a creator. You might call that creator different things. You might have lots of gods or whatever, but you believe they created the world. But an end times thing was just straight up denial of the creator. And that end times in that chapter, it says that they will deny special creation. They'll deny a supernatural creation of the world, and they will deny a worldwide flood where God judged the ancient world in a flood. And that's what it says in that chapter. It's kind of fascinating. We don't really pay attention to that. And it says that because of those denials, they won't be ready for the final judgment. So we care about you guys. We want you to be saved, and we want you to believe your Bible. And so that's one of the motivations for doing this presentation. We want you to believe in Jesus' sacrifice for your sins and have a personal relationship with him. We don't think you have to be creationist to do that, but that is the account of our origins from the same book that tells us about this Savior, Jesus Christ. It tells us again and again how he created the world. So we're passionate about that. We think there's evidence in the natural world that supports the creation account. And we think it's a better explanation than Darwinian evolution for the evidence that we see. And we hope to make a compelling case for that tonight. So the presentation is going to last tonight an hour and 15 minutes, Dave?
Something like that.
Something like that. He's already hedging his bets.
A little less than 6 hours anyhow.
And we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So a little bit about our speakers tonight. Dave and Mary Jo Nutting. Dave's from Grand Junction, Colorado, and Mary Jo's from Mankato, Minnesota. And they both like hiking. Dave's an avid fly fisherman. Mary Jo likes spending time with her grandkids. And it shows when she comes and stays with our family because she's like a second grandma to us. And they are both former evolutionists who have carefully studied the evidence and became convinced of the truth of creation. They are founders and directors of Alpha Omega Institute and have been teaching creation science for over 40 years. And some people have been visiting our seminars for a while, and it used to be almost 40 years, but now it's over 40 years. They have degrees in mathematics and biology from Colorado State University, and also Dave got his master's in mathematics there as well. So Mary Jo in biology, Dave in math, and his master's in math from there as well. And then they both have degrees from the Institute for Creation Research. Mary Jo in biology at a higher level, so that'd be the equivalent of a master's. With a science education emphasis, and Dave in geology. I believe he got the equivalent of a geology undergrad, a double major over at Colorado State University, but he was just didn't care about getting the paper. You can ask him about that. Both have taught at the high school and college level. These presentations are being live streamed and recorded on our YouTube channel. So if you're curious about that, grab a flyer. If you don't have one on your way out from our info table, it has the QR code on it. It's also under Maranatha space MN. That's our channel. If you can spell Maranatha, then have fun and try to find it, okay? Without further ado, please welcome first Dave Nutting.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be with you this evening. All right. Anyhow, we are going to be talking about the first topic here is biological proofs of evolution fail. Okay? The evidence cries out design. It's going to be in kind of 2 or 3 parts. Mary Jo will be coming up to speak here before very long. I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction to it and let you know that both Mary Jo and I were believers in the theory of evolution. And for me, I never questioned it. Never once questioned about it, because that's all I ever been taught. And so, of course, I believed in evolution. And I'm afraid that's probably what a lot of people end up doing. That's all they hear, so of course they're going to believe that evolution is a fact. Until we started studying the other side of the coin. And there is a other side of a coin, okay? We're going to hope to present that to you tonight. A lot of people think this creation versus evolution controversy is just a religious argument. You know, they say evolution is science, creation is religion. Well, have you heard that before? Yes, we hear that all the time, don't we? And I'm here to tell you, just before I duck behind the podium here or whatever, I'm here to tell you that evolution is not science. It is philosophy that is posing as though it were science. And I hope to demonstrate that before too awful long, okay? Anyhow, it's also the pillar of the naturalistic worldview. Now, what is that? Naturalism. It's everything in the universe can and must be explained by what? Natural processes without a God. That's naturalism, okay? It's amazing how quickly this philosophy and worldview of naturalism overtook the sciences, even in the last 40, 45 years, okay? And when I look at that, you say, worldview, what is that? What's how you view the world? Pretty easy, right? Like, for instance, if I have on red glasses, what color would that wall over there look? Red. If I have on green glasses, it'll probably look green, right? So somehow or another, the glasses you wear dictate what you see. And that's what a worldview does. The worldview is how you view the world, whether you can believe it from a naturalistic viewpoint without God, or maybe you can allow God in the picture. Those are worldviews, aren't they? And it'll dictate what you will look at, what you'll see when you actually do it. Your worldview can affect your interpretation of the data that you're looking at the evidence, okay? It'll affect it. And that explains what we call the ultimate academic mystery. How two very good scientists can look at the very same evidence and come up with completely different viewpoints on how things came about in this world. Okay? One was going to tell you, oh, evolution is a fact, and therefore I see evolution everywhere I look. Well, what kind of glasses they have on? Naturalistic worldview glasses, okay? And so that's the ultimate academic mystery. Now, let me tell you this. Naturalism. Let me give you an example why I think it is a religious concept or a philosophical concept posing as though it were science. All right, the Big Bang, natural. One of the first things you might think about. The origin of the universe. Here's Discover Magazine, 100% committed to the idea of naturalism, okay? They won't use the design word, okay? They don't use it. Where did everything come from? There's a quote right there on their front cover. The universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Okay, zero, nada. And as it got bigger, it became filled with more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. How's that possible? It's a good question. You understand what we're saying? Is that science? Nothing exploding? All right, think about it. Nothing exploding. Okay, that doesn't go along with observation, does it? No, usually you have to have something to explode. And of course, they have all kinds of different theories, etc. But tonight, even though you're being taught naturalism, you're probably, many of you, taught that you have to explain everything from a natural perspective without God. I'm going to give you license tonight. It's okay to think. Okay? It's okay to think here. Thinking is allowed. You don't have to be chained to naturalism if the data is pointing toward a creator God. You don't have to be chained to that. All right? So that's what we're going to look at. And we're going to first look at some of the very best evidences of evolution and what's wrong with those. Okay? And that's where Mary Jo, the biologist, is going to come in right now. You want this thing?
Wow. Yeah, I want that.
Oh, you need this microphone. Here you go.
There we go. All righty.
It'll work.
Is that clear enough?
Got it? Good.
All right.
You muted it now, though.
What?
You muted it.
I get it?
Press the wrong button.
Okay, there we go. I asked you if it was working, then I turned it off. All right. What is evolution anyway? What's the definition of evolution? I mean, at the
I think
base
you're gonna have to
level.
hold it.
What?
I think you're gonna have to hold it.
I'll hold it,
I'm sorry.
okay.
It's kinda
That might be
leaning
better, huh?
away.
Okay.
Not too close, but just,
At the base level, evolution just means change, doesn't it? And so in that way, we could say, okay, all of us believe things change. So we all believe in evolution, right? But the real question then becomes, how much change and what kind of change are we talking about? Are we talking about mega evolution, which is kind of the idea of the Big Bang, and then from there to molecules, and all the way from molecules up to man? That's kind of the overall theory of evolution, or the theory of evolution with a capital E. Or maybe you're talking about macroevolution. And what that tells you is that things can change from one basic body plan to another, to another, to another. So fish to amphibians to reptiles, and all the way on up to people. From fish to philosophers, I guess you could say. Another type of evolution you might be talking about is microevolution. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. And microevolution really is just variation within a type or a kind of creature. In other words, you can have all sorts of frogs, but they're still frogs. You can have a whole variety of dogs, but they're still dogs. And so we need to make it clear when we're talking about evolution, what type of evolution are we talking about anyway? If we're talking about this kind of variation, we don't have too big of a problem calling that evolution, microevolution, if you want to call it that. There are questions there, though, about what brings that kind of variation and where do we go from that variation as we look further. So we see variation, yes, but evolution, no, there. What do we see? Common evidences of evolution that are typically given in textbooks and museums and zoos and all around the country on TV shows, whatever. And we're seeing here then variations, but are they the kind of variations we need to explain the molecules to man type of evolution? Or are they just variation within a created kind? We think there's variation, yes, but evolution, no. What about Darwin's famous finches? Remember the story? Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands. He saw those varieties of finches there. And as he was looking at those finches, he thought perhaps they had come from an ancestral pair of finches that had flown over from South America and had diversified since that time, having different beak shapes and sizes and so on. And maybe that's true. But the question is, what did you start with here? You start with finches. And what do you end up with? You end up with finches. Nothing fundamentally new. And they're doing some observations now on these finches and finding that variation seems to be somewhat corresponding to changes in the environment. So when there's periods of wet years, the beak shape and size is different than when there's periods of dry years. There's also been some more common research being done on epigenetics. Now, epigenetics, for those of you that are not biologists, in a simplified fashion, it just means genetics really refers to the DNA. But epigenetics, epi means on top of, and so there are certain factors that can attach to the DNA molecule, and they seem to be involved in a lot of various processes. They seem to be involved in turning on various portions of the genes and so on. Well, as we look at epigenetics, here's a quote from Jeffrey Tompkins. He says, scientists have discovered that the genes are very similar among the various species of these finches. They discovered that epigenetics closely correlated with the beak shape and sizes among the species. Epigenetic mechanisms clearly remain a major player in adaptation. And so we can see we have the genetic material, but then we have these epigenetic factors which also will be involved in getting the variations that we see among the various types. Finches are finches, and they don't change into other kinds of things, at least not according to observation. And remember, science is based on observation and experimentation. And so when we're looking at the evidence, we want to base it on those things. What about the famous peppered moths? They were around in Great Britain before the Industrial Revolution. At that point in time, the air was nice and clean, and the tree bark was light-colored. This is how the story goes, at least. And so the light ones were better camouflaged than the dark ones. And the idea that's been taught for a long time is, therefore, the birds were able to pick off the dark ones, so there were more light moths than dark moths. And then the Industrial Revolution came along, and the tree bark became darkened with soot. And after a while, they noticed more dark moths than light ones. Is this evolution? It's oftentimes said this is an example of natural selection. This is how evolution takes place. And in fact, we've had people tell us this is one of the very best evidences of evolution. I look at that and I go, what did we start with? You start with moths, light ones and dark ones. What do you end up with? Moths, light ones and dark ones. Now, there may be some changes in relative numbers, but they're still moths. They're nothing fundamentally different. And when we look at these moths, this whole story may be bogus, because what they found out in doing more research is these moths don't even normally rest on the trunks of the trees. They normally fly around at night, and during the daytime, they go up into the leaves of the trees, and that's where they are. They had to be stuck on those tree barks to get the pictures in the book. Now, that's not real good evidence in my way of thinking. And so these peppered moths really don't demonstrate evolution at all. Jonathan Wells wrote this book, Icons of Evolution. He included the peppered moth in there. And then years later, he was vindicated, and they found that that his theories about the moths were actually confirmed. And so when we look at that, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. What about the varieties of bacteria and virus? You know, you always hear that they will adapt, right? They change so quickly. Well, how are they evolving? If you take a petri dish and you put some bacteria on it and then pour antibiotics on it, some of them will live and many of them will die. And then, of course, the ones that live can go on and reproduce, and you get a population that's more resistant to that particular kind of antibiotic. Is that really evolution, though? You have to be able to show, where do you get new genetic information? And what we're showing here is, okay, maybe that's an example of natural selection, but that doesn't tell us where do we get the new genetic information that comes about. And how do we get that? What do we start with? We start with bacteria. What do we end up with? Bacteria, the same basic types of bacteria, nothing fundamentally new. The population as a whole is less able to adapt, actually, because you have fewer amounts of variation in the whole population. So we look at these kinds of things and we say, well, is that really evidence of evolution from molecules to man? It may explain a little bit about how we get variations within the populations, but it doesn't explain how can we change from one-celled creatures all the way up to human beings. What about the races? What did Darwin teach about the races? Actually, Darwin thought his ideas were that the various races of human beings came from different varieties of apes and monkeys. And therefore, he thought that some of the human races were more advanced than others. Darwin's ideas actually were, I don't think they'd be taught anywhere today. You wouldn't want them taught in the university, I'm sure, because Darwin's idea was that white people were further evolved than dark people. In fact, he says Darwin's theories claim that Africans and Australians are more closely related to apes than Europeans are. Well, we don't want to teach that today, I don't think. This purported superiority justified to Darwin the domination of inferior races by Europeans, as white Europeans, quote, exterminate and replace the world's, quote, savage races, which he meant the Africans and Australians there, and as great apes go extinct, Darwin says the gap between civilized man and his closest evolutionary ancestor will widen. In other words, there's a big gap between races according to Darwin. Now we know today that this is not taught anymore. We're not saying it's taught today this way, but what we are saying is, this was Darwin's idea. The idea of racism was very consistent with the evolutionary ideas. The biblical model is not really consistent with the idea of races, and certainly not the superiority of one race over another. Actually, if you start with the right combination of skin colors, you can get all the way from darkest dark to lightest light in one generation. And some of you love these Punnett squares. Others of you hate those Punnett squares, right? But they're an easy way, shorthand way to show what happens in the next generation when you have two parents there. And now you go, well, how in the world is that possible? One generation all the way from darkest dark to lightest light. Here's one family, medium skin colors, and they're two little girls. Different colored skin, right? Here they are as they grow a little older. And so you can see even within one family we can get that. There is variation possible then. Lots of variation, but it's based on genetics. Pretty much simple Mendelian genetics. By the way, Darwin didn't know anything about Mendelian genetics. Mendel's work was not completed until shortly after Darwin's time, which I find that very fascinating because I wonder if Mendel's work had come out before Darwin's, if it might have had an influence on how much evolution was actually accepted and taught. Well, here's the next question is, according to evolution, how do we get new genetic information? Darwin didn't know. He thought, well, maybe Lamarck's ideas were right, the inheritance of acquired traits. That was the idea. Lamarck thought, well, maybe these giraffes used to be short-necked animals, and then there was a drought, and they stretched their neck to reach the leaves of the trees, and that stretched neck was passed on to the next generation. Most people today have totally rejected that idea, but Darwin didn't know. He kind of accepted that idea. Now they don't accept Lamarckianism too much, but what the current idea in new Darwinism is that evolution proceeds by mutation plus natural selection. So the two mechanisms involved are mutation, which is a change in the genetic structure, and natural selection, which is able to select the good ones, save them, and weed out the bad ones. And so that's kind of the idea by which evolution is said to proceed today. But think about it, neither mutation nor natural selection is a creative mechanism. I mean, you have to have something to mutate, don't you? If you're gonna change something, you have to have something there to change to begin with. And then if you're gonna select something, you have to have something to select. If I offer you grape juice or orange juice, you can't get apple juice out of that. It doesn't work, does it? So selection, you have to have something there to select already. And mutation, you have to have something to change. Question, according to actual observations, what do mutations produce? Well, they produce a lot of aberrations, like snakes with two heads and cattle with extra legs and roosters without any feathers and all sorts of fruit flies. Fruit flies with 2 wings, fruit flies with 4 wings, fruit flies with no wings, different colored body, different colored eyes, all sorts of fruit flies. But most of them would not survive in the natural environment in which, you might be able to produce these in the genetics lab, but they wouldn't survive in the wild. They're still fruit flies, though, aren't they? They don't change to anything else. What do you observe that mutations produce? Mutations can produce duplication of information, like we saw there, from 2 wings to 4 wings. They can produce a loss of information. You can get flies with no wings at all. They might produce a degradation or deregulation of genetic information, kind of like what happens in a lot of cancers. It could result in aging and death. Now, those things are not exactly what you need to go from molecules to man. It doesn't tell us how are we going to generate all of the genetic variability that we see in the world today. Most of us also realize mutations are harmful. I mean, if you had a friend and they said they had a baby that had a genetic mutation, most people wouldn't jump up and down and go, oh yay, they must be better. I mean, most of us would go, that's too bad. We're sorry to hear that, because we understand mutations generally are either going to be harmful or have no immediate effect. We don't see those good mutations in the numbers that would have to be there to go from molecules to man. And that's pretty much what Dr. John Sanford said in his book, Genetic Entropy. Genetic entropy means the increase of disorder within the genetics based on these random changes produced by mutation. Sanford, he's no longer at Cornell. He's a retired Cornell University professor and genetics researcher. Lots of patents, lots of articles. But I think that last one is very significant. He's the co-inventor of the gene gun process by which we are able to sequence the DNA molecules. This guy knows a whole lot more about genetics than I do. Now, very humble man, very interested in making sure that what he's putting out there is really true. He says the primary axiom of Darwinian evolution is that evolution proceeds by mutation plus natural selection. Well, that's pretty much the way it's normally taught. But the problem is, he says, it does not work. He says it's now clear that mutation and selection cannot stop the loss of genetic information. So mutation and selection clearly couldn't create it in the first place. Then he says, careful analysis on many levels consistently reveals that the primary axiom is wrong. In other words, mutation plus natural selection does not lead to an onward, upward kind of evolution. He says this: if mutation and selection can't prevent the degeneration of the genome, then the primary axiom is wrong. It's not just implausible. It's not just unlikely. It is absolutely dead wrong. Look at those terms he's saying. He's saying it's not just a false axiom, it's an unsupported and discredited hypothesis which can be confidently rejected. So when you get into a biology class and they teach you that evolution proceeds by mutation plus natural selection, Dr. John Sanford says you can confidently reject that idea. It just plain doesn't work. So the mechanisms for evolution, mutation plus natural selection, they can't explain the origin of new kinds of living things. They may be involved in a bit of the variability, but not creating anything from scratch, from nothing. So the big question then becomes, where do you get life in the first place? I mean, according to the Big Bang Dave was talking about, right, it all exploded from absolutely nothing, and now we're supposedly come up with molecules that become organic molecules, which eventually will become living cells. But has anybody ever proven that? Nobody was there to watch it happen. You can't repeat it in the laboratory. And so what do we find? It really is just evolutionary speculation. It's not been proven. It's not been demonstrated. What we do know based on observation is life can come only from pre-existing life. That's probably one of the best laws of biology. It's one of the first things you learn in biology. Life comes from previous life, right? From existing life. Well, where did that first life come from? Then they say, oh, well, that first life came from non-living molecules. And you go, show me where. We don't see it. It's an assumed presumption because after all, we're here. And so it must have happened, they tell us. But we call that wishful speculations. And this quote is, we should reject as a matter of principle the substitution of intelligent design for the dialogue of chance and necessity. So in other words, don't bring into this discussion even the possibility that there might be an intelligent creator, is what they're saying. And then they're saying, we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations. There's that word again, wishful speculations. But true science is based on what? Observation and experimentation, not just speculations. Now, you may have some imagination and speculation going on in what hypotheses you put forward, but when you want to demonstrate anything scientifically, it needs to come on the basis of observation and experimentation. Now, I should make the comment also here that also includes creation, doesn't it? We're not saying you can prove creation scientifically, but what we can do is we can look at the evidence and we can say it points more reasonably to a creator than the result of accidents and chance. Is there faith involved in that statement? Yes, there is. But is there faith involved in the evolutionary statements? There is. Nobody's ever been able to prove evolution. And so what do we see? According to evolution, where's the faith in the evolutionary statement? It's faith in time and chance and natural processes. In the creation model, we put our faith in the existence of an intelligent creator. And you're going to have to decide for yourself which one you're willing to believe, because that's really what it comes down to, is what are you willing to believe? I think the creation model fits better with what we see. Similarity is the second one here. And similarity or homology. Homology just means the study of similarities. And there's various kinds of similarities. Here what we're seeing is structural similarity. And for example, the man's leg and the dog's, or the man's arm, the dog's leg, the bird and the whale, they all seem to have sort of a similar bone structure. And this one has been used a lot in the past. I'm not sure that it's being used as much today. But the argument was, based on similarity, that means we had common ancestry. Question is, though, is that the only explanation for similarity? I don't think it is. I think there's several other good explanations why things might be similar. Maybe they're similar because they were designed for a similar function. And what we're actually seeing is variation on a theme. Or maybe they're similar because they were designed by the same designer. We have one God, not a pantheon of gods. It's kind of like going into an art museum and you can recognize maybe all the Rembrandts based on their style and their colors they use and the themes. And so, you can recognize the style. And I like this one, I think the best, is maybe they're similar because they were designed to work together. We live in an ecosystem. It fits together. One thing is dependent on another thing. It all fits together. We live in a universe. And so the chemicals that are used in various animals, the biochemicals, very similar to the chemicals in our body. The same elements have to be able to be used in us as in the other kinds of creatures on this earth. And so perhaps that's another reason why things look so similar. This one was used a lot in the past. I thought it was probably had been no longer presented, but we still find it in textbooks and magazines and so on. And it's the idea that about 2 months in development, that little baby embryo inside of the mother repeats the stages of evolution and says, look, we have gill slits and a yolk sac and a tail. That reminds us of when we, as human beings, were in the fish stage and, gradually changing into something else. Problem is, gill slits. Let me tell you two things about the gill slits. They're not gills and they're not slits. So why call them gill slits? That terminology itself has an evolutionary bias to it. It's already trying to point us to the fact or the idea that we are somehow related to fish. The yolk sac in human beings is not needed for producing yolk. It produces the blood cells for the little baby till it's big enough to make the blood and the bones and so on. Later on, it just drops off. It's not needed anymore. So it's not a yolk sac. And the tail, It looks a little bit like a tail there, doesn't it? But it's really just the end of the spinal column. It grows a little more quickly than the rest of the baby at this stage of development. As it grows, it stimulates the growth of the legs and the other structures in that part of the body. These things are just not, they're not what the terms tell you they are. And so why call them by these evolutionary terms except to try to, again, show the close relationship between humans and animals of various types. Back in the late 1800s, Ernst Haeckel was a real proponent of Darwinian evolution, and he proposed this thing called the biogenetic law, or ontogeny, recapitulates phylogeny. That's a big mouthful. What's it mean? The idea was that as the human baby developed inside the mother's womb, it would repeat the stages of evolution. So it went through a fish-like stage and a salamander-like stage, a reptilian-type stage, and so on, and finally became human. And Ernst Haeckel drew these diagrams up here, and it made them look so similar. Problem is, those diagrams were fraudulent. Good embryologists today know that there's many differences, and in fact, people can show, if you're a good embryologist, you can recognize differences even at the very early stages. Ernst Haeckel was called before a board of scientific examiners and chastised for what he was doing here. This idea is just plain wrong. It's been debunked many, many years ago, and yet it's still oftentimes found being used in textbooks and other places as evidence of evolution. And here's the good old gill slits. Look at that date, October 2024. Still being taught. It shouldn't be, okay? There's enough evidence to say, no, this is not good scientific evidence. The one they're using a lot today to show similarity is biochemical homology. And what they're looking at here is structures and sequences within the DNA molecule, or within the RNA molecule, or the amino acids within proteins. And based on similarity of those DNA molecules, or similarity of those proteins, they come up with these evolutionary trees of life. Problem is, you would think that as you get more and more and more evidence, it should be zeroing in on the one real true historical evolutionary tree, if it was true at all. And yet you're finding all sorts of diverse trees based on differing chemicals. This is how you come up with claims like this, though, in the popular magazines. They said here chimps and humans share almost 99% of their DNA. Well, does that mean we are related to the chimpanzees? That sounds like a pretty good evidence, does it? But it still doesn't prove whether or not that similarity is there because of common ancestry or because of common design. But that number, 99%, is a little out of date too, because that thing's gone down since then. Went down to 93%, then it went down to 86 to 89%, maybe as low as 70%. But so what? The mouse DNA is 97%, supposedly, similar to humans. So did we evolve from ape-like creatures or mouse-like creatures? Or we're just looking at similarity here. Zebrafish, 92%. I like this one. Bananas, 50%. Similar to bananas. So what does that prove? It just shows that we have some similarities with other living things. Now that makes sense because our DNA is made up basically of the same structures and the same four bases, the A, D, C, and G, right? That some of you remember from biology class. But it makes sense because we only have those four. Way back in 1985, Michael Denton wrote a book called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. Now, he was not a creationist at that time. He's a molecular biologist, but he started studying these sequences of similarities, and he realized there were some major problems. He says the really significant finding that comes to light from comparing the protein's amino acid sequences is that it is impossible to arrange them in any sort of evolutionary series. He was not a creationist at that time. Then Michael Lynch came along later and he says clarification of the phylogenetic, that's basically evolutionary relationships of the major animal phyla, has been an elusive problem, with analyses based on different genes and even different analyses based on the same genes yielding a diversity of phylogenetic or evolutionary trees. What's he saying? Even if you use the same chemicals and you're doing a different analysis, you might come up with a different tree of life. It doesn't seem like we're zeroing in on that one true evolutionary tree of life. It seems like we're getting further and further away from it. Back in 2012 or 2009, there was an article written in New Scientist says Darwin was wrong. And in that article, they published a picture of Darwin's sketch of an evolutionary tree of life. And he had put this in his journal, and he was just going, what about this? This is a speculation. Look what he wrote on there. I think. It's his speculation. He's just trying to figure out what might have happened. I think. And has the data proven this? Has the data supported it? Not well. It has not. Here's a couple quotes from this article. For a long time, the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life. A few years ago, it looked as though that grail was within reach. But today, the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. And in the article, if you read the article, the negative evidence they're talking about is DNA studies. That the DNA studies are showing that this whole tree of life thing doesn't work. They say in there, the tree of life, one of the iconic concepts of evolution, has turned out to be a figment of our imagination. Again, science is based on what? Observation and experimentation, not imagination. And so he's saying it doesn't work. He says, we have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality. So why does it continue to be presented in textbooks, in museums, in zoos, on TV, everywhere you look? Why does it continue to be presented as the only theory, basically, of how human life came about and all the other creatures came about on this earth? They say biology is vastly more complex than we thought. And facing up to this complexity will be scary. I don't think it's scary. I think it's exciting. Because the more that we find out about this world we live in, the more complexity we see. The more phenomenal life becomes in our understanding when we see the complex interrelationships of parts in living creatures and so on. So this tree of life is being cut down by science itself. Whoops. There we go. Go back. There we go. Yeah. It's being cut down right there by science itself. And what do we see? We see the endpoints, but we do not see these connecting points. Those are what are imagination. And so when we look at similarity, we can just say, no, it's not really good, strong evidence in favor of evolution. What about the idea of junk? And what do we mean by junk? We mean these idea of vestigial organs. So these are supposedly leftovers, useless leftovers from the past evolutionary history that had a bigger function in the past than today. And we really don't need them very much today. At one point, they had a list of 180 different things on this list in the human that they said were leftover from evolution. On that list was a pituitary gland and several other things here that we have listed. But pituitary gland, now we know, and a lot of times called the master gland of the body, is involved in regulating the hormone systems and a lot of the other biochemical systems in our body. Is certainly not vestigial or useless. The others, the thymus, the tonsils, and the appendix, are all involved in immunity. Very important functions, not useless leftovers. They called the wisdom teeth vestiges or leftovers from evolution, but hey, wisdom teeth are for chewing, just like any other tooth. And sometimes the jaw doesn't develop big enough to contain it, and yeah, they can become impacted, and there can be problems. But does that mean it didn't have a function to start with? I mean, you can have something go wrong with your heart. Does that mean it wasn't an important organ to start with? Not at all. Or they could say, sometimes they'll tell us, well, vestigial organs, you can live without them, so they must not be very important. And I go, well, you can live without your hand too, but does that mean your hand is not important? That argument does not, they really don't work, those arguments. The one they've used a lot in recent years was the idea of junk DNA. When they first came out with the sequencing of the DNA molecule, you would read 97 or 98% of the DNA molecule is junk. It has no function. Well, as a creationist, we made the prediction that said, go back to the lab, do the research. We predict that you're going to find function for those sections of the DNA. We predict that it's not just useless. And sure enough, as that research has been done, Dr. John Sanford says it's becoming increasingly clear that most or all of the genome is functional. There was an ENCODE project done in 2012, international project. They looked at some of the molecules or some of the sections of DNA that were called junk DNA, and they were trying to find out if there was a function in there. And at the end of the project, here's what they concluded. Almost every nucleotide is associated with a function. It's not just leftovers with no purpose to it. It has a function. This metaphor of junk isn't that useful, they say. And so we look at the key point is it's not junk. It has very, very important functions within the human body and other creatures. Here's just a very few of the uses of the non-protein coding DNA that was in those sections that were called junk. Repairing DNA, that's pretty important. Assisting in DNA replication, we have to have that or we'd all be dead. Regulating DNA transcription, well, that's in the process of making proteins. We need that. Aiding in folding chromosomes. If we don't fold them up properly, they don't work properly. There's aiding in the maintenance of chromosomes, controlling RNA, editing and splicing, helping to fight disease, and regulating embryological development. If we didn't have those sections of DNA that are sometimes called junk DNA, none of us would be here because we all had to come through an embryological development process, didn't we? The research on these has been just coming out. It's phenomenal. Article after article after article based on research being done on these sections that used to be called junk DNA. They're just not junk at all. And in fact, here in 2021, human genome 20th anniversary junk DNA hits the trash. It's just not, it's a bad idea. Okay, so junk, we can say no. Now, what about imperfection? Imperfection is the idea that when we look at an organ, we can say, oh, there are imperfections in that organ. And Dawkins said, Darwin used to say, to this day, the eye makes me shudder. He knew that his theory of evolution by natural selection couldn't explain complex structures like the human eye. And yet Dr. Dawkins says, oh, the human eye has an absurd design. You know, there's tissue in the line of sight, and if it was designed in another way, we could see more clearly. Problem is, if it was designed the way Richard Dawkins says, you'd be blind in just a couple hours if you go out into the sunlight. Your eyes are one of the very best pairs of sunglasses you could get, according to the design of the eyes. A friend of ours, Dr. Fred Lang, is an eye surgeon from Costa Rica. And he loves to talk about the design of the human eye. He can talk for hours and hours and hours about the design of the human eye. He says it's not evidence of imperfection. Now, can things happen to that eye to make it not work properly? Yeah, but it's a whole lot easier to go downhill, isn't it, than to go back uphill to come up with a less design instead of a better design. And I wish you could hear Dr. Lang's talks because they're pretty phenomenal. So the evidence cries out, we believe, created with a design, created with a purpose. Dave's going to come, he's going to show you some more really cool evidences of design.
Okay. I'll put that up here. My voice loud enough for you? Good. All right. Anyhow, first of all, I'm going to just give you a little commercial here, real quickly. All right. We do certain tours from a creationist viewpoint looking at design. One of our favorite design tours happens to be Costa Rica. It's just an amazing place to see God's handiwork there. And if you want to know about that, we have some little bit of flyers over here too. Yellowstone National Park as well. We had creation tours in 2024, 3 different ones. Some of you guys were here, right? Yep, there you go. But anyhow, next year we're going to have one June 16 to 20. And then some other ones in August. They're still to be arranged, okay? Anyhow, so Yellowstone, amazing designs there too. And we do have flyers over there. You can go ahead and click on them. All right, it's just absolutely amazing design that we see out there. You know, my computer is well designed, right? And I'm not talking about Mac versus PC for some of you here. Everybody has an argument on that one. But what do you see? Do you realize that my computer is not as well designed as the one on top of your head? Did you know that? Your brain basically is much better than my computer. And if I believe that my computer is designed and yours is better, that tells me yours is to design too. It's just an extrapolation there. Okay. Anyhow, did you know the total number of synapses in a brain roughly equals the number of stars in 1,500 Milky Way-sized galaxies? That's a bunch. You know, close enough approximation, right? That's a bunch of them. And yet, can we really believe all this happened by accident? No. What do those who believe in naturalism say about the brain and how it came about? Here it is. Perhaps an early cell, billions of years ago, developed a sensitivity to other cells. Then it is conceivable it would be on its way to becoming a human brain. A couple of words there that are not scientific. Perhaps and conceivable. When you read, that's just the hope of naturalism. That's the faith, or you might say even the religion of naturalism right there. It's a hope. To steal a line out of some famous movie, I'd say it's not conceivable, it's inconceivable. It's not gonna happen, okay? All right, think about this one. The genome, according to Dr. Carter, is talking about DNA in the whole genome. The genome is a multi-dimensional operating system for an ultra-complex biological computer with built-in error correction and self-modification codes. There are multiple overlapping DNA codes, RNA codes, and structural codes. Dr. Robert Carter. Sounds design, doesn't it? Not just a two-dimensional thing, like they fake a twisted ladder on the DNA, but multiple dimensions, including 4 dimensions, okay? All right, so one of my favorite design features we see in Costa Rica, I love it. And when we were in Costa Rica, when I was going down there, I said, I would really love to see a blue morpho butterfly. I really want to see one. Mary Jo began praying for that, and God answered her prayer, okay? Because before long, I had one blue morpho land on my arm. And then it went from my arm to my beard. Is that close enough? I wanted to see it up close, and it was. But anyhow, guess what? That blue morpho butterfly, even though it looks blue, it's not blue. You said, what? What are you talking about? Doesn't that look blue? Well, no, it's not blue. Now, let's look at the underside of the blue morpho butterfly. There it is, right there. Wait a minute, how do you get the blue color? Well, actually, the scales on the upper part of the wing are, on the top of it, are clear. Kind of like my fingernail, okay? Kind of like my fingernail, clear. So how does it get the color? Well, those scales consist of millions of layers called laminae, okay? And what happens is when you see that, these are basically meticulously spaced. The light comes in and all of the part of the light spectrum is filtered out except for the blue. Interesting. The blue is not just reflected out, but it is whoosh, amplified out. Isn't that amazing? An airline pilot from 30,000 feet in the air can see one of these morpho butterflies, or a group of them, on the ground. Isn't that amazing? Such a bright flash they will get. They will see it. Anyhow, it's just amazing. Here, the spacing of the laminae must be precisely controlled to 1/8 the wavelength of light. Approximately 1.4 million layers of these laminae are meticulously arranged with incredible accuracies on the wings. Now, do you think that all just happened by accident? No, not at all. I like this part. And I know this is university, but excuse me here. But the works of the Lord are great. It's actually sought out of all of them that have pleasure therein. His works are to be remembered. That's one of his great works, isn't it? Blue morpho butterfly, for sure. And I was speaking down in Costa Rica after we did a creation tour. I was at a church, and I was talking just exactly what I said. And then I told the audience, the next time you see a blue morpho butterfly, and they see them off and on down there, I said, the next time you see a blue morpho butterfly, I want you to stop and just praise God for his meticulous design. Guess what? I no sooner said it, and all of a sudden, a blue morpho butterfly flew over the congregation and landed. And whoa, people were going, yay, wow. I loved it. God's timing was meticulous too, okay? And now you might say that's a coincidence. I don't. I think it's God working. I believe it's a God-cidence, not a coincidence, okay? Anyhow, so what does it naturalism say about the blue morpho, about the eye, etc.? Almost every particular design idea I might throw out at you today, almost all of them are going to be answered by one simple thing. We can imagine how mutations and natural selection, acting over millions of years, might refine or produce systems. Do you realize that is a faith statement? And there are a couple words here that are not scientific either. Imagine and might. Okay? Those aren't scientific terms. That's just slapping a coat of paint over something that we say, it looks designed, but I don't have an answer for it, so we can imagine. Okay? You got to come up with some explanation in naturalism. Okay? Okay, well, good enough. So what is this basis of it? Every one of the naturalistic explanation relies on the heroes of time coupled with mutation and selection. Millions of years, right? You're going to hear that all the time. Thinking is allowed, remember. Okay? Thinking is allowed. We don't have to be stuck in the naturalistic viewpoint at all. And in fact, remember when they say mutation and natural selection, like they just said right there, what did Dr. John Sanford say about it, who is a top genetic researcher around the world? What did he say? Mutation selection can be confidently rejected. It doesn't work. All right? Now, all right, so let me give you a couple of things that I think mutation and natural selection can't even touch. All right? One thing in particular, evidence of design. Think about your little finger. Just look at it. You see that little finger? Look at the end of it. Do you realize there are more electric motors working on a molecular level, more motors in the end of your little finger than there are gasoline engines and electric motors in the entire world, man-made. Did you know that? That many of them. Why? Because every one of your cells, and you have trillions of cells in your body, every one of them have molecular machines, molecular motors. And according to Howard Berg, he says from Harvard University, he said these motors and machines are the most efficient machines in the universe. Better than what we can make, in other words, right? He said that. Well, let me just talk today about one of them. And even though this, you can quote David Godsill here, these are ones of the wonders of the molecular world. It's going to make energy for you. You need energy, don't you? Even to walk down the hall, you need energy. You need energy to think, because your brain needs that, right? You need energy. Well, this is the energy-producing machine right here. We're going to call that the synthase machine. That's what it's called, synthase, and that is a specific one that'll make energy. I want you to understand what it's going to take to make that particular machine. And this is all going on inside of those little tiny cells that you can't barely see with a microscope. Okay? But there are other things going on inside the cell that you can't even see with that microscope. You have to use very sophisticated or advanced electron scanning microscopes, okay? And chemical type reactions. That's what you're going to have to do. All right, so how do you get this? I just want you to now think, is it even possible to do it? Is it possible? All right, so how are you going to start? First of all, you start with the DNA. And you're going to make a protein because why? You need a bunch of proteins. This machine you're trying to produce needs 32 specific proteins, 32 of them. Okay, now, how do you get them? You have to start with the DNA, which is, by the way, takes 70 proteins to make, okay? But you start with the DNA. You've got to basically unwind this long DNA, and if you were to unwind the entire thing, do you realize that thing would be about 3 feet to 6 feet long inside of every one of your cells? Woo-hoo. That's amazing. All right. But you unwind it. Oh, then what you have to do is split it. Okay, so you're going to have something that's going to cut it. It's got to be a slit. And then what you're going to do is take one little section of that DNA, and that's what you need is a computer instruction to make the specific protein that you are going to need for that machine. So what do? You don't use the original, you make a copy of it. Okay, now you scientists, I'm sure, know the different names on the different aspects of what I'm talking about, including messenger RNA, all these things. But for those of you who are not in the sciences, I don't want your eyes to glaze over. Okay, so we have a copy machine, and it takes a picture of it, but now you've got to take that picture into the ribosomes, and the ribosome is going to take the computer instruction, and it is now an assembly plant, and it's going to put a bead of strings together. Every one of those beads happens to be a specific amino acid, and let's call them different color beads, okay? All right, you have to have these in exactly the right order, and if it's not in the right order, it's not going to work. And some of these strings might be 200 amino acids long. Some might be 4,000 amino acids long. It's taken the computer instruction. And once it gets into the ribosome, chink, 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 one bead after another is put on. Boom, boom. It's an assembly plant. That's another machine, isn't it? Oh, by the way, that ribosome is made up of 300 proteins in order to assemble a protein. Which came first, you wonder, huh? Okay, now, so what happens is that particular machine now produces this long bead of marbles, long chain of beads, and now it's not really a working protein yet. It has to be folded to the perfect shape. So you've got to have a folding machine, okay? Now it gets folded to the perfect shape, and it's ready to go into that machine called the synthase to produce energy. Okay? Oh, that's simple. Yeah, right. It's not simple so far. Okay, but now how do you get it to go from where you just put it together and folded it? How do you get it to the other side of the cell? It's a long ways across there. Real long ways. Doesn't seem like it, it's in that little tiny cell, but these particles are so small. Okay, so what happens? You call UPS. Call UPS. UPS comes, it's going to take that protein that was just made and now is shaped in the right shape, and now it goes in, and that UPS guy is going to deliver it plus a whole bunch of other things to make this machine over here that takes 32 proteins. But UPS needs a highway, right? Do you realize that inside of the cells there are highways? And the UPS, the kinesin transport, now comes running down this highway to drop its load of proteins so you can get an energy producing system. Okay? Now, I see design. And mutation and natural selection cannot be the answer. You know why? It's not even living. It is a cell. There's no natural selection. You can't do it. All right? And so you have to have everything working and operating at exactly the same time in order for that to work. All right. So that is just one machine. Do you realize, according to Dr. Ken Dill, you have over 20,000 types of molecular machines just in humans alone? 20,000 of them in humans. Wow. And according to the Dill, he says, these are real machines. Okay, these are, where'd it go? Okay, here it is. These are real machines, according to what Dill says, and working at the sub-microscopic level. You have folding machines, you have pumps, valves, force generators, energy producers, labeling machines, delivery, UPS, and more. Okay? All this is working. 20,000 types. Okay, now, what answers would an evolutionist who believes in naturalism provide for this? Any guesses? 1, given enough time, anything can happen. That is the hope of what? Evolutionary naturalism. Strictly a hope. Part of their religious answer, okay? Or we can imagine, but I think this defies imagination when you really look at it, all right? It defies it. Or here's another answer. Dr. Scott Todd, who was really instrumental in making sure in Kansas that you can't teach intelligent design at all. You know what he said? Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. Naturalism has him chained. He's in a box, and he wants his students to be in that box too, doesn't he? Nobody can think out of the box. But here, tonight, thinking is allowed. Okay? I see design. I suspect most all of you would see design here. Now, how do you explain it? Can you accept it? Does your worldview allow you to accept there could be a creator God that did this? Somebody's a whole lot smarter than any one of us. Okay? Somebody knows what they're doing to put that together. And so I'm hoping the students here will no longer think they have to be chained to naturalism. If the data leads to a supernatural origin, why not go there? Except somebody 45 years ago said, we got to believe in naturalism. Okay? That's about right. That's all we have. Remember, evolutionary naturalism is a belief system. It's a philosophy, but it's posing as science. Okay? All right, now let's just show you how much faith it takes. All right? What is the probability of making even one protein by accident? That's what it has to be, right? You have to get everything lined up just perfect. What's the probability of even a small protein by accident? I calculated it one time and showed it to my university statistics class that I was teaching, okay? And we did for 10 minutes in the class, and I showed the probability of one simple protein being one chance in the number 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, 260 times. Now, keep in mind, that's a lot of faith to believe that happened because there are only 10 times 10 times 10, 84 times marbles that could fit in the entire known universe, much bigger than what anybody has ever suggested. Okay? And so, the probability of making that one simple protein by chance is like finding a blue marble in a universe filled with red marbles, and not finding it once, but finding that thing 3 times in a row, blindfolded, accidentally. Parnell, no fair play. It's going to have to be by accident. Okay? Right. If you could do that, it'd be 100 million times easier than making that one simple protein. Okay? If that's just one protein, think about it. We're not talking about just one protein. It takes 70 proteins to make the DNA. And yet it takes DNA to code for proteins, right? And remember, that has to go into the ribosome. The ribosome consists of 300 proteins. Whoa. And the synthase machine that we're going to give you the energy is 32 proteins. So you see what's happening to the probability? It is exponentially getting worse for evolution, okay? It really is. I believe the evidence cries out. Things were created with a design that couldn't just happen, all right? That's, let's say this, thinking is allowed, okay? Thinking is allowed. What if Darwin knew about the inner workings of a cell? What if he knew that? Wonder what if he would have held to his theories. Do you think so? All right. What if he knew about DNA? He thought the cell was nothing but a blob of jello-like stuff. He didn't know anything about the inner working. He didn't know anything that there were highways inside a cell and a UPS. Well, he didn't even know UPS, did he? But he had a delivery system. He didn't know there were sewer systems inside the cell and guards on the gates and all this kind of stuff, or any of these 20,000 different types of molecular motors inside those cells. He knew nothing of that. So would he still have clung to his evolutionary ideas? That's a good question. I can't answer it for him, okay? I can't answer that. Would he still have done that? I couldn't have. I don't think so. All right, so anyhow, the proofs, the biological proofs of evolution seem to fail. The evidence seems to cry out design. Okay? That was tonight's session. Tomorrow night, I get to talk about fossils. What do fossils say about evolution? Nothing. Rocks don't talk. All right? But we talk for them, don't we? And they speak volumes when we use the interpretation and see what we're looking at there. The next night is geology. Who's the hero of the plot? Is it lots of time and lots of water? Maybe catastrophe. All right? That's our third night. And so that's what you're going to come into the next couple of nights here. And so we have a free newsletter called Think and Believe. Oh, wait a minute. Thinking is allowed. Huh? Think and Believe, all right? And if you want that, just click on that, or just go to our website, discovercreation.org, look up Think and Believe, and you can get that mailed to you, or we can give you a computer feed for it that'll show up in your computer box every couple of months, okay? So come to our website. We have a lot of great stuff there, a lot of great evidences. And basically, there's some flyers over here. Just real quickly. All right. So there's some of these right here on the side of this table. And this is called Discover Creation with Alpha Mega Institute. Here's what we say on the front cover. You have likely been taught evolution is a fact and that the Bible is full of errors. Could you have been brainwashed? Next page. Who, me? Brainwashed? Okay. Think about it. And then it'll give some great evidences, we believe, for creation. Okay? Things to consider and whatever. And inside it also is a list of very important resources for you and that you can order from Alpha Mega Institute. All right? We don't have them here tonight, but if you look at it, we might have some of these if you want it and come a subsequent night. Parnell, it's over to you. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for allowing me to come yak at you. Okay, thank you.
All right, Dave. Let's give Dave a round of applause. And Mary Jo.
Oh, mention this, Parnell. We do a training as well. If you're interested in creation versus evolution, we train people to be able to handle the evidence and be able to speak to those who would be against you. All right? And there's even a gap year program we do as well. So That's, somebody gets tired of all the evolution they've been getting for all these years at the university. This is something that you might be interested in. All right? Okay.
All right, so we're going to jump into Q&A, and we welcome the hard questions. That's where we learn the most, so don't be bashful just because there's kids in the room. It's all right. We brought them here to get the full experience, so if you have a hard question, that's great. And when we're done with that, then we have the room till 10 if we want to. So it doesn't have to be a formal Q&A. It can be we can break the formal, close the formal portion and just hang out, and you can continue to ask questions of, for example, our speakers or any one of us if you'd like to. And with Q&A, as it is Q&A, and we have brought in our speakers, we ask that if you want to share, that you have a question for our speakers. So with that, please, if you'd like to ask any questions, raise your hand.
Come on up, Mary Jo. I let her answer all the hard ones.
Yeah, go ahead.
Most every one of them is a hard one. All right.
So I have around like 4 questions written down. It's first variation first, like
Can you get a
evolution.
mic so we can hear?
We didn't hear
I
that.
won't repeat it for you.
Okay.
Like variation versus evolution short term. What I remember hearing earlier about like what you talked about was that a lot of things like there you said that there was variation, just not evolution. It's just that, don't you think that like
Here, I'll give you a mic.
okay, yeah. Oh, sorry, this is a bit harder.
Is it a question?
Yep.
So one of the things you talked about earlier was like
A little closer to your mouth.
like the bacterial antibiotic resistance. I can't remember the question, so I'm just gonna go move on. One of the other questions I have is if one of the beliefs is that God made everything, then is there any like sort of thought that what made God?
Sure, that's a fair question, okay? And you can't answer that scientifically, okay? So I'll give you a faith answer on that. The Bible says that God is eternal, okay? Otherwise, according to evolution, we're going to say that it started someplace, somehow, right? And the point that we have here is that both evolution and creation require faith, and both can deal with the scientific evidence. And so you can look at the scientific evidence, you can say, well, which one seems to fit the facts best? But you ultimately come down to either God is eternal, or matter and energy are eternal, or everything came from absolutely nothing by nothing. And that is your choice. You know, what are you going to believe in? It comes down to what are you willing to believe?
That does also lead to like another question of okay, how do we know there was nothing?
How do we know there was nothing? Yeah, that's a good question.
That's what
I
Discover
mean, that's
magazine said.
That's what the Discover magazine said there. You know, the Big Bang Theory, I don't know, they used to say it came from a little ball about that size, you know, or less than the size, I've seen it even less than the size of the head of a pin, that all the matter in the entire universe was condensed into that little speck of matter and then it exploded. But how do we know that? We have no way to measure that. So again, it's outside of science, it's a matter of faith. And, you know, we're not saying, if you want to believe that, that's up to you, you know. We're just asking, we're just wanting you to challenge what you've been taught and think about it and see if it makes sense to you, okay?
Do you remember that question?
Okay, next question.
Like the other question? No, I don't. I'm really bad.
Parnell, do you need to add something to that? Grab the mic if you do.
Okay, when you talked about how like making a protein can sort of be like a totally random process, like 10 to the power of 260 or so. So isn't that, I mean, personally, that sounds like a little too much of like I don't think we just went from nothing to like just making a perfect protein. Wouldn't you think it'd be more logical if we made like something a lot more simpler than a protein, and then we sort of worked our way up over time?
Okay, he's talking about you're talking about what the probability arguments of the protein, right? That's a statistical argument, yes. And it's what he presented was a statistical argument based on probabilities, okay? We know that it takes complex machinery to make proteins today. And that was just a statistical example to say if you were to take amino acids and put them in an order to get a 200 amino acid protein just by accidents, that would be a statistical probability is what he presented.
And a 200 amino acid string of protein is actually a very small one then, okay? Especially when you realize that you have in your body strings of these proteins, or these proteins with strings of hundreds, 1,000, up to 4,000 at least or more specific amino acids in that bead of string.
And you
Or
can
the string of beads, I should say.
you can speculate that there were even smaller and smaller things, but how would they be reproduced and saved? I mean, they have to, if you're gonna generate something randomly by natural processes, it has to be able to be saved and reproduce in order to be passed on to the next generation, right? I mean, if you came up with, say, 50 amino acids in a row, but then if it wasn't saved and it didn't reproduce, it wouldn't do you any good either. And so again, these are speculations. They're not scientifically observed facts.
Okay, yours and then yours, okay?
I have a question about a lot of the language.
Keep it really close to your mouth, okay?
A lot of the language or things you pointed out for the naturalistic worldview was that they use a lot of, especially for things that are relatively unknown, non-scientific language like perhaps or it's conceivable or imagine this or it might be this. And then as I was listening to what you guys had to say, it seemed like the argument that you guys were making also used a lot of this not very precise language like might or imagine or along those lines. So my question is, how is the religious worldview any different than the naturalistic worldview?
That's a hard question. I'll let her answer it.
How is the religious worldview any different than the naturalistic worldview? In reality, you come back to that, don't you? Both of them require faith. It's outside of the realm of science. We do not have the scientific evidence to demonstrate how the evolutionary process could have worked from the very beginning all the way to get all the variety we have in the living world today. And so in the end, you look at the scientific evidence, you think about it, and you say, do I think it came about by natural processes of time and chance, or do I think that there's a potential possibility there could be an intelligent creator? And it is a faith statement, okay? We're not trying to prove creation scientifically. We're just showing you that the evidence that we see that we interpret on the basis of intelligent design, we believe fits a whole lot better with that idea that there's an intelligent creator than it all happened by accidents and chance. So we're not trying to prove the Bible to be true. We're not trying to prove creation, but we want to give you an alternative, okay? And I mean, I think if science, if you teach evolution as one potential possibility, okay. But when it's the only thing presented in the classrooms, then we feel like you're you're not being given that option. It's like evolution is presented as the only option. And so we're just want to encourage you to look at it for yourself.
Following that up, it seems like my issue personally that I kind of have with the idea that they both require faith is that in my personal experience, it seems like the religious worldview almost seems like they don't strive to try and figure out what the cause is, but just to exclusively believe and put their faith in the way things work through God. Whereas what I see of the naturalistic worldview is, despite not knowing what is going on, we continue to look for what we don't understand. And to my understanding, the advancements in finding out new things about the way our world works, or biology or whatever, requires exclusive non-belief in the fact that it could be more advanced. It requires the belief of that it could be more advanced versus there's a design and then that's kind of it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see it that way, because if you look back to the history of science, you find out that the great scientists from which we've gotten modern science, it was built by people who believed in a creator primarily, and that actually spurred their desire to study this natural world. And so for me, as I look at it, the desire to understand this world comes from a biblical worldview. And you can have that from a naturalistic worldview too. I mean, it's not like it's exclusive, but the scientists of the day were saying, no, we want to understand how this creator made this, and we also believe that the creator gave us human beings the responsibility of stewardship of the creation. And in order to do a good job with that, we need to understand it. I like to explain it for kids. You know, if you get a new puppy and you don't know how to take care of a puppy, that puppy's probably not going to do real well, right? You need to know what to feed it. You need to know that it shouldn't eat chocolate, right? And various other things. But you need to understand this natural world. And so the biblical creationist worldview has in the past spurred on the scientific research. It has not impeded it. Now, it could impede it if you just said, well, everything, we just explain it. God did it, God did it, God did it. But we want to know why and how, because we have inquiring minds.
And we are scientists, so we want to know.
One of the things, and you might think I'm crazy, but I mean, I was studying this great big thick Lineger's biochemistry book. And, you know, we came to the spots in there where we can see how differing molecules work in some of these really complex biochemical reactions. And I can look at that and I can just praise God for the complexity and beauty of what he's done. Or we could say, isn't that amazing what chance has done? Again, it's up to, you know, you have to make up your own mind. The thing I find is, I find it much more satisfying, personally, to believe that there is an intelligent creator who cares about us, who cares about our lives, than to think we're just an accident, and when we're gone, you know, what happens? We're just molecules, and our molecules just go back to the earth? That's not a real satisfying answer to me personally.
Well, there's like one PhD zoology student told us one time, my parents are atheists. And they're getting up in their late 70s. You know, there's not much hope in atheism. And he was a very solid anti-creationist, pro-atheist, etc. But when he started getting some answers, he realized there's not much hope in the atheist viewpoint. or the naturalistic, that everything happened without a God, you might say. And at that point, he became open with his mind, and now God can work in his life. Okay?
That's not a scientific argument, okay? But that's why we say this whole debate about evolution and creation really comes back to more philosophical arguments. It comes back to what is the meaning and purpose of life? Is there meaning and purpose to life? You know, is there something beyond what just molecules doing what comes naturally? And that's where, you know, listen to what your heart is saying. You know, if you're satisfied with that answer of naturalism, that's up to you, right?
There's somebody over here. Yeah. Thank you for your questions and your grappling with this information.
So,
Appreciate that
Yes,
very
thank
much.
you very much.
But you don't have to leave.
We got the time.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
I have, I guess, a couple of quick rebuttal points before my question. First, since you like quoting famous people to make your points, going back to how a 260 amino acid protein could randomly, which doesn't happen, but could randomly happen. I believe it was Mark Twain who said there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And you definitely hit the statistics part. And that's not a compliment. Also, as an evolutionist, which is not what anybody except creationists call evolutionary biologists, but as an evolutionist, I'm glad the cherry tree evolved. So now there are cherries, so you can cherry pick data, which is what you've done throughout this whole talk. But
Ask a question, Dana.
I'm getting there.
Get there quicker, please. We didn't come to berate the speakers. We came to
I'm
ask
not
questions.
berating. I'm, I
Please
think,
ask a
making
question.
legitimate points.
If you have a question, please make it.
So, you said science and religion are faith, and I agree with you on that point. I'm sorry, that's not a question yet. I'm just agreeing. Philosophically, at a really basic level, that is true. We believe in science. You believe in science. I assume you've gotten a vaccine or gone to a doctor at some point in time. They learned their stuff through science. The difference is that science kind of builds on itself and religion doesn't have to. And it's not a binary decision like you make it sound, like it's either evolution or it's your version of creationism. Because there's lots of creationism stories out
All right,
there.
you got 10 seconds for a question.
Maybe other people want to hear this.
Well, it's not their show, so.
Okay,
Ask a question.
so,
I'll let Parnell answer that
Go for it.
comment.
you know,
Please, just
you,
ask a question, Dana. It's for questions.
What's your question?
Yeah, go ahead.
do you think that the faith in science is exactly philosophically the same as the faith in religion?
We believe in experimental science, okay?
Oh, yeah.
We don't have a problem with experimental science, observational science.
Thought that was a straightforward yes or no question, but.
What?
ahead.
So we do believe in science. We're not saying we don't believe in the science or the scientific method. We believe that, I mean, look at over the years, what scientists in general, whether they're evolutionists or creationists, what has been discovered about the workings of a cell, for example. I don't debate that, okay? Now, some of it I can't verify myself because I don't have the ability to go verify every fact or every discovery. None of us could. We have to take it that somebody is doing the research, right? But the complexity of a cell, look at what's been discovered since Darwin's time. I mean, amazing advancements. We're not denying that at all. But what we're looking at is the evolutionary arguments seem to be, to us, they seem to be trying to say that everything came about through these naturalistic processes. And how do we know that? How do we know that? When we look at the complexity of design, I mean, I don't know how many millions and millions and billions of years it would take to generate all of the mass of genetic information we have, starting with, presumably, according to the generally accepted evolution models, if it did all start naturalistically, somehow we have to get the complexity of life. And to me, that's a bigger step of faith than I'm willing to take. We're not debating the facts that we can see in science, that we can, do repeatable experimentation. Other people can repeat those experiments and verify those experiments, or they can say, no, it doesn't work. And so the processes of science, in my way of looking at it, is science is a process that humankinds have developed to try to understand this physical world that we live in. A world of energy, a world of matter and time. And so when we're looking at the basics of biology or life science or geology or whatever, we're not denying the evidence. We're not denying theories. Theories are great. Put out the theories, put out the hypotheses, but the whole purpose in doing science is to try to discover more about this physical universe that we live in. And it's just that the evolutionary models and you would say the intelligent design models, you'd say, well, I'm assuming you would say that's just a religious model. And I'm saying I would rather place my faith in an intelligent creator than in time and chance. That doesn't deny any real science. And our purpose in science is what? To understand this world and to try to make it a better place to live in. Better medicines, better invention. I'm certainly glad somebody discovered the physics behind how to build a wash machine, for example. Science has practical, more engineering, right? But the scientific principles behind the engineering have very practical consequences in our lives. And so we're not denying science.
The question was, do you think the faith philosophy, which there is faith in science, absolutely is. Do you think that philosophy, that level of faith is the same as any religious paradigm? Because you talk about Christianity, that's where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. What about Islam? What about Hinduism? What about Buddhism? They are mutually exclusive.
Well, then you're into a different question or a different realm. Then we could compare the evidences for those various religions and see which seems to fit best.
Don't answer the question.
I mean, that's a whole other question. Then you get into the area of apologetics, and you can look at the manuscripts, you can look at the numbers of the manuscripts, you can look at the accuracy, and so on. And so that's really a different question than the evolution creation question. And tonight we're dealing with the evolution question. Okay, we're not here tonight to try to argue for Christianity over and against any other religion.
You just did.
What?
You just did. Talking about faith and being saved and eternal life. That is exactly what you were talking about.
That's our belief. We're not afraid to say that that's our belief. If you want to talk about various religions, talk to Parnell. He can talk for hours about the various religions and the reasons why we believe that Christianity is a much more accurate description, and the biblical record is more accurate. So, yeah, we're happy to talk about that too, but that's a different topic than what we've been presenting.
And yes, I do come from I came from an evolutionary perspective. I always, at one time or another, believed there was a God. Now, what you're saying with the one question is, there's other religions. They have different viewpoints. Well, that's not what we're talking about. There is something, whether there's a creator God or not, okay? And I see evidence for that creator God. I really do. And my own personal viewpoint is that creator God happens to be the God of the Bible. Now, that's my personal viewpoint, okay? That doesn't mean you have to believe that. But I believe, when I look at so much evidence taken all together, that he is the creator God, is the God of the Bible. Okay, but now, that doesn't mean we can't talk about the aspects of science. Can you see evidence of design? Can you see the different proofs for evolution that we've been given? And that they really don't fold up altogether. When you look at it, there's another way sometimes to explain that from a creation perspective as well. And sometimes the arguments we are given for evolution, most people would say they don't make sense. A lot of them, okay? And as you look at it, I think I can make more sense out of design, and there is a creator designer, okay? Because design means designer, okay? And that's one of the things that they don't want in intelligent design. Because if you once indicate, oh, that looks like there's intelligence behind that, who is that intelligence? All right, therefore it's no longer naturalistic. And now you're trampling on my turf, okay? Or, you know, for the university professor. Go
Do you have any more questions? Yeah.
Okay, all right, here, take that.
What are the implications of creating a synthetic cell? Don't focus on whether or not it is possible. Focus on what happens when we do it.
Well, we're a long ways away from it, for one thing. And when you're talking about creating a synthetic cell, are you talking about starting from molecules, or are you talking about starting from what is already known about cells and starting with cell parts? What are you talking about?
It could be anything. I think they're doing cell parts or just basic macromolecules. But it's a global effort, and they're basically trying whatever will work.
Right now, they are utilizing living cells, taking them apart, putting them back together. And so there's an old joke, you know, it's a God and Satan are talking, okay? I can make this, oh yeah, see, I can make this, and I can make that. Let's have a contest, God says, okay? And so we're going to create a man, okay? And Satan goes ahead and he starts grabbing a bunch of dirt, and God says, no, make your own dirt. All right? You got to start from yourself. What you usually start, and virtually all of those different concerted efforts to make a cell, is that you are already starting with something that is a cell, or that is something like that.
Or the macromolecules.
Yeah.
The question there would be, you know, if you're taking something that's already pretty advanced to start with, feasibly, could you ever go into the lab and start with raw chemicals? Maybe you could. But they're not just going to throw those chemicals together. They're going to use intelligence, aren't they? They're using all their brains trying to put this cell together. And so that just goes to show you it takes intelligence. It doesn't just happen by chance. If it happened all the time by chance, we ought to be able to see, you know, living things coming out of nothing all over the place. If it was all just chance. But we have to go back, and then we have to speculate what the early Earth atmosphere was like. And, you know, so yes, if you could put one together, okay, we might be able to do that at some point. But that doesn't prove that's how it got there in the first place.
There was a experiment clear back in the 1950s referred to as the Stanley Miller experiments. And what they were able to do is take chemicals that are used in biochemical systems, okay? Biological systems. And what they were able to do and show that is you could take a spark and hit these particular things of nitrogen and several other things. And what they ended up doing was making amino acids, right? They made some amino acids. Okay, that was really good. That was Stanley Miller experiment. But you know what the newspaper said? You know what some of the textbooks began saying? Stanley Miller produced life in the laboratory. Is that life, Mary Jo?
It's a long way from life, isn't it? You can produce a few amino acids, but in the natural world, they reacted in wrong ways. They tied up with the sugars and so on, and there's a lot of different problems with that experiment. Now you could do it in the laboratory, but they had to also take they put all the substances together in the reaction chamber, but then they had to remove them very quickly, because if they left them in that atmosphere, they would be destroyed at a rate faster than they were being produced. And so it's showing that, okay, so we can do that in the lab. That doesn't demonstrate how life began.
Okay, somebody else. Was there something you wanted to get at as a follow-up to that? Okay,
Yeah, we have another one over here.
okay, good.
So is the reason that you agree more with sort of those religious viewpoints, is it because that it sort of gives more just more sort of closure? Because you also did say that how things were created is still just really statistical. So it's really kind of what you think of it. Is sort of a more Christian viewpoint, does that just give more closure? Because personally that feels like that's putting nature, that's putting the universe into sort of a way that we can sort of understand, but it feels like in a way that's where the universe is just so big and everything is just so vast that it doesn't feel like we'd be able to really take in and understand and thoroughly explain everything and how it happened.
We can't. Nobody can explain everything about how it happened, can we? I mean, the amount of information in this universe is just immense, okay? And no matter how many scientists we have and how many years we have, we will never understand everything going on in this universe, will we?
Or the human body.
I mean, even in our human body, even in a cell, I doubt that we're ever going to really understand everything there is to know about life. And so I'm not sure where your question is going to. Is it a more satisfying answer? Well, you have to answer that personally.
The closer we look at it.
I was just asking sort of, is the reason that you may find that more religious viewpoints are more satisfying because it gives more mental closure? Because when you said a lot about atheist viewpoints, that there's no hope and stuff like that, while that does in a naturalist viewpoint that does seem more realistic and that seems more real. But is the reason you're going for more of a Christian viewpoint, is that just because it gives just more hope and satisfaction and stuff like that?
No, it's not only that. It's just it is that when you do come to know the Lord in that way, it brings more peace into your life. It gives purpose in life, and you begin to know God on a personal level, because God is a personality. He's not just a force, he's a personality. And you can get to know him. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, in order that we might know the Creator. That we might know that Creator. And I believe, yes, that gives you great purpose and meaning in your life. And you might find purpose in atheism. You might say, well, the purpose is to do good. But then you have a question, is how do you define good? What is the definition? How do we define good? We all sort of have an intuitive idea. We should be nice to people, right? We should be kind. We should treat other people well. And so we all have that kind of a built-in intuitive idea of what it means to be good. But the standard of good, Jesus Christ, when he was walking on the earth, said, somebody came and they asked him, good teacher, and he says, who is good? God is good. Only God is good. And so God's goodness is our goal is to reflect his goodness on this earth. And I'll grant you, Christians don't always do that perfectly. In fact, very imperfectly at times. But that doesn't mean God isn't good. It just means we are human beings who are trying our best to follow a good God and to act on this earth as he would act, to do as Jesus did when he lived on this earth. He went around doing good. He healed people. He raised them from the dead. He preached the good news to them that they could have a relationship with their Creator and their God. And it's something really you have to experience, because it's a personal commitment and a personal experience to be able to trust this Creator God. But I can tell you, and many of the others in this room can tell you, that it does bring meaning and purpose to life.
Yeah, in regards to the universe, I've heard this is not. I personally enjoyed a series by a former space engineer, military space engineer named Spike Passaris, and he has a three video series. He worked, I think, for NASA, but he was an atheist. He became a Christian and a creationist, but he has a series called Our Created Solar System, Our Created Galaxy, and Our Created Universe. Those are the three parts to the series. Our Created Solar System, Our Created Galaxy, Our Created Universe. And he goes into astrophysics and presents a case for creation and shows the amount of things that kind of don't fit with an evolutionary view of the universe and of galaxies and of our solar system. He shows all the contradictions and anomalies to it when you get into the details, and it's fascinating if you like that kind of stuff. Otherwise, he's kind of dry in his presentation, but I think the material is quite fascinating, so I recommend it. Passaris is spelled kind of complicated, but P-S-A-R-R-I-S, Passaris.
Got him on YouTube.
He's on YouTube. Those videos are on YouTube, so.
Or we have them on our website if you want to buy them, but I think you can get them on YouTube. They're fascinating. They really are.
Yeah, I think that we kind of arrive at, the Bible says that in Romans, it says, what can be known about God is plain to us because he has made it plain to us. It says ever since the creation of the world, his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature can be seen through what has been made so that men are without excuse. So God uses, according to Scripture, it uses the argument that we can see that there's an eternal, all-powerful, personal God from the things that have been made. And so we do believe that when you look at the world, it speaks of design, just intuitively. And so we're trying to present that. We've come to know the Creator through Jesus Christ. And yes, it has given meaning to our lives, incredible meaning. And so that's our motivation, is that you would know him too, and everyone would. He told us how we did it in the Scriptures. We think that it's a compelling, like for example, the first scripture of the Bible, the very first verse of Genesis says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That's the first verse. And that's cool because you have like the basic elements to everything. You have time, beginning, and the heavens. You have space, and the earth. You have matter. I think so. Fascinating text about what this universe just in the first verse there. But so I think unless there's any other questions, I think we're just going to close the formal Q&A and just welcome you to hang out and talk further. Just as a reminder, we have a presentation on fossils tomorrow night here at 7, and geology on Friday night here at 7. And they will also be sharing at our worship meeting on Saturday night at our church, campus church. Flyers are on the table at 7, just on the edge of campus. So you're all welcome if you want to come and worship with us and check out that presentation. Thanks for coming.